He only ever saw his brother in the mirror, but his mother swore she gave birth to 2 boys. They burned the house down in 1901, not to destroy evidence, but to contain it. What they discovered inside that small Romanian village near the Argeș River never made it to any medical journal. No priest would speak of it, no historian dared file a record. It was never officially documented, yet every elder in that region still won't look into a mirror after midnight. Because of the boy. The one whose brother lived only in reflections. His name was Eli, born in 1880, seemingly healthy, 10 fingers, 10 toes, wide, unblinking eyes. His mother, Eleanor, screamed during childbirth, not from pain, but from confusion. Because there were 2 cries, 2 heartbeats, 2 names already chosen, but only one boy in the room. The midwife searched the room 3 times over, the sheets, the basin, the bed, but only one child was found. The second was simply gone, as if he had never existed, until the mirror showed otherwise. At first, Eleanor thought she was hallucinating. When she bathed Ilie in the old brass tub, she saw his reflection smile, and then smirk, while the real boy remained completely still. She thought it was exhaustion, grief. But then came the drawings. Eli began sketching his brother by age 5, always staring out from glass, not beside him, not holding his hand, trapped, watching, waiting. The boy in the mirror wore the same clothes, had the same face, but there was something else. A slight lean in posture, a tilt in the jawline, and eyes that always looked past you, like they were staring into the future, or your soul. By age 8, Ilya refused to enter rooms with mirrors. He would cry if he passed a polished window. He would scream if someone tried to take a family photo, because the camera captured what the naked eye could never process. The villa, Gers called it a curse. The church called it blasphemy. But the boy, he just called him brother. What no one asked was who the twin truly was, and why he only ever showed up when no one else was looking. The truth was older than Ilya, older than the village, and older than the glass that held him. The first time someone tried to cover the mirror, it ripped itself open. Elena had draped a heavy black cloth across the hallway looking glass after Ilya refused to walk past it. It was an old tradition, especially in times of mourning. Cover the mirrors, keep the spirits from entering. But this wasn't a tradition. This was war. War against something inside the glass. The next morning, the cloth was on the floor, cut down the middle, not torn, not blown by wind, cut clean and straight from top to bottom, as if with a razor. But no one in the house owned such a blade. The child swore he hadn't touched it, and the cut, it appeared on both the cloth and the reflection of the cloth, as though the mirror had mirrored its own revenge. By now, Ilya had stopped answering to his own name. He began introducing himself as we. His voice would slip, low one moment, high the next. Sometimes he'd repeat what you said before you said it. He was learning to echo. The doctors from Bucharest came only once. One of them fainted when Ilya tilted his head and whispered a word in Old Dacian, a dead tongue spoken before the Roman conquest, a language not even the scholars at the academy could decipher without ancient texts. But Ilya, he spoke it, and his eyes weren't just watching anymore. They were remembering. The boy was dreaming of lives he never lived. Centuries-old places, burning temples, silver masks, men in black robes speaking to mirrors that pulsed like water. One morning, Elena found him holding a shard of glass to his chest. He wasn't cutting, he was listening. He said the mirror told him the truth of the first twin, and when she asked who the first twin was, Ilya answered, the one who stood before the first lie. What lie? What truth? The priest was summoned, but he wouldn't enter the house. He only whispered through the door, your child has no shadow to in the spirit world, but something else has his shape. You see, this wasn't possession, it wasn't insanity, it was reversal. The mirror wasn't reflecting Ilya. Ili was reflecting what lived in the mirror, and it was starting to bleed through. There was a phrase the villagers used behind closed doors, whispered like a curse they were too afraid to name. Glass is a door that forgot it was a prison. They believed mirrors had once served a purpose, not to reflect, but to contain. Old spirits, old sins, old versions of the self the world was never meant to see. But if a mirror cracked, even a little, the prison remembered its power, and the thing inside, it started to wake. Ili's twin wasn't a ghost. He wasn't dead. He was waiting. By Ili's 10th birthday, the mirror in his bedroom no longer showed the same room. That's how it began. The reflection would shift, just slightly, when no one else was looking. A chair that moved a few inches to the left. A candle burned out in the mirror but still lit on the table. Once Elena swore she saw her own reflection blink before she did. They smashed the mirrors. All of them. Glass shards were buried deep in the forest, scattered at crossroads, burned in fire. But it made no difference. Ili's eyes became the new mirror. People said when you looked into them too long, you'd feel something leaning over your own shoulder. Not touching, just watching. Waiting for your blink. Waiting to be let in. And it wasn't just Ili anymore. One by one, children in the village stopped casting reflections at night. Some stared into puddles longer than they should. One little girl refused to drink water because she said her own reflection was drinking faster than she was. The village began to rot from the inside. Not physically, spiritually. As if its soul had split into two, just like the boy. A mirror can't lie, but it can choose what truth it reflects. And Ili, he was no longer the one being reflected. He was becoming the reflection itself. A vessel, a silhouette pulled forward from something ancient and inverted. The midwife who helped deliver him finally broke her silence before dying. She said, the child was born second, but the mirror boy came first. Then she looked at her reflection and screamed until her eyes went dark. There was a journal, a hidden one. Not in Elena's handwriting, but in Ili's, though it was written in a style no 10-year-old child could replicate. Precise cursive, complex phrasing, and symbols that matched no known alphabet. She found it beneath the floorboards after waking to the sound of scratching, not the movement of mice, but the steady drag of ink on parchment. It wasn't the scratching of fear, it was calm, calculated, purposeful. Ili had been writing in the dark, by candlelight, to someone he never named, only called the other me. He remembers everything. I only remember when he lets me, but when I sleep, I can taste what he sees. One passage described a temple with no roof, deep underground, lit by molten silver, where men fed mirrored versions of themselves into a well. They believed their reflected selves held the impurities of their bloodlines, and that by sacrificing them in the water, they could become gods. Another entry was a warning. Do not speak your name 3 times in front of glass. The 3rd time, you become the echo. Ili had started using a new name in the journal, Spiegelein, a Germanic corruption of the word for little mirror. But no one in his house spoke German, no one in the village did either. Yet he claimed this name wasn't his creation. It was given to him by the boy on the other side. The transformation wasn't just spiritual. Ilya's bones began to ache at night. He would scream as if being bent or stretched. When the village healer examined him, she said his spine was shifting, not breaking, not damaged, but realigning. You're becoming your reflection, she told him, trembling, but the mirror version of you was never human to begin with. And then came the animals. Birds flew into windows when Ili passed by. Cats hissed at puddles. Dogs howled if he looked into their eyes, as if they saw something else. Looking back, the deeper Eleanor read the journal, the more it became clear. Ili wasn't writing it for himself. He was documenting the slow merging of 2 realms, ours and the inverted one behind the glass. And the boy in the mirror was no longer content with being seen. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted to be real. Elena stopped looking into mirrors completely, not out of superstition, but out of survival. She had seen something no mother should ever see. One night, she caught a glimpse of Ilie standing in the hallway, or at least, she thought it was Ilie. He was motionless, staring at her from the shadows, his face half lit by candlelight. But something was wrong. His eyes weren't moving, not blinking, not breathing, not alive. She turned to confront him, only to find Ilie asleep in bed behind her. The boy in the hallway faded, as if melting into reflection. It was the twin, the one who could only appear when no one believed. The villagers, gripped by fear, turned to the church again. But the priests this time didn't just refuse to help. They left. Overnight. Vanished without even a word of warning. Because they had seen the signs, and they knew the name. A name that hadn't been spoken in Romania for over 1,000 years. Specularum. Latin for those who dwell in reflection. Ancient cults lost to time once believed that every human had a mirrored double, not just in appearance but in soul. And if the mirror double ever crossed over, it would carry not just its own consciousness, but everything dark we were meant to forget. Sins we denied. Memories we buried. Thoughts we claimed we never had. That's why mirrors were once covered in death rites. Not just to prevent the soul from getting trapped, but to keep the other soul from escaping. Ilie wasn't just cursed. He was chosen. His bloodline traced back to the Order of the Pale Reflection, a secret brotherhood that once served as guardians between worlds. It was said they had one job, to make sure no child of mirror birth was allowed to live past 12. And Ilie was already 10. In a forgotten archive beneath the town hall, Eleanor found an etched plate, worn and rusted. It showed a boy without a shadow, reaching through a looking glass to strangle his own reflection. The inscription read, "Only one may remain in the light, the other must return to silver." She didn't tell Ilie what she found. She didn't have to. That night he said to her, "When I turn 12, one of us has to die. And I don't think it's going to be him." Ilie began speaking in plural, not just we anymore, but us before and us after. He talked like someone who had memories from both sides of the mirror, timelines layered like thin sheets of glass, always touching but never meant to merge, until now. His drawings evolved. Gone were the simple sketches of the mirror boy. Now he drew doorways made of bone, staircases spiraling into liquid glass, and a figure sitting on a throne, faceless, its body made of thousands of fractured reflections, each one screaming silently. He called it the origin. One drawing disturbed Elena most. It was a perfect reflection of their home, the hallway, the sitting room, even the oil lamp on the mantel. But in the mirror world version, everything was reversed, except Ilie. He stood at the center, looking straight ahead, smiling. In both versions, the message was clear. He no longer belonged to either side. He was becoming the space in between. That same week, something strange happened in the village. Every mirror cracked, simultaneously. Not shattered, split, vertically, down the center, as if something was trying to push through. People fled. Entire families left their homes behind. The school shut down. The town's only clock tower stopped ticking at 3:33 a.m. and hasn't moved since. Elena tried to confront Ilie, to save him, to reach him. But the boy was gone. What sat in her son's place had his voice, but it answered questions before she asked them. It laughed when she prayed. It flinched when shown fire. Not because it feared being burned, but because it feared being seen for what it truly was. In desperation, she took him to the oldest man in the region, a blind seer named Radu, who lived beneath the chapel ruins. Radu didn't touch the boy, didn't speak. He simply sat and listened. After 1 hour in silence, Radu whispered, "He's already passed through." Eleanor trembled. Through what? Radu turned his head, as if staring directly at her with sightless eyes. Through the lie of light, into the truth of reflection. Then he handed her a single object, a mirror. But in this one, there was no reflection at all, only darkness, and the sound of breathing. The mirror Radu gave her was old, centuries old, framed in iron, cold to the touch even beside flame. And yet, it was alive. Not metaphorically, literally. When Elena held it, she felt a pulse beneath her fingertips, slow and deep, like the heartbeat of something sleeping just behind the glass. No reflection appeared, not her face, not Ili's, not the room, nothing, just a shifting void. As though the mirror had been turned into a window, but the world on the other side had forgotten light altogether. That night, Ili refused to come near it. He backed away like an animal sensing its predator. When Elena asked him why, he whispered without blinking, "Because he can't lie to it." It was the first time he'd referred to the mirror twin as he, as something separate from himself. That distinction didn't last long. By morning, Ilya's voice began splitting. Not cracking, not maturing, splitting. 2 tones at once, 2 pitches in harmony, one human, the other slithering. And when he slept, his body would twitch in patterns, mirroring itself, left arm rising as the right leg dropped, eyelids fluttering in opposing rhythms. He was practicing inversion. And then came the writing on the walls. Not graffiti, not childlike scribbles. Symbols, ancient ones, burned into the plaster, etched with fingernails that bled black. When translated, they told a ritual, not to summon the twin, but to swap places with him. The mirror, Radu had explained, wasn't an object. It was a contract, an ancient one, signed in silence, sealed with fear. For centuries, the reflected ones had made offers to children born under fractured bloodlines, twins separated by birth, identities fragmented through trauma, souls weakened by grief. The weaker of the two would be replaced, and the stronger, the one behind the mirror, would walk free. That was the plan. That had always been the Baitis' plan. But Ilie? He was different. He wasn't resisting the mirror. He was negotiating with it. Now, as we cross the halfway point, if you're still here, comment the phrase below twice to mark your descent, and to remind yourself you chose to awaken. I see what they hid. I see what they hid. The mirror in Elena's hands began to change. Not its shape, not its frame, but its presence. It no longer sat passively on the table or hung lifeless on the wall. It leaned ever so slightly toward wherever Ilia stood, like a compass drawn to magnetic north, or a predator drawn to prey. It wasn't just reflecting anymore. It was listening. Sometimes Elena would hear faint sounds when the room was silent. A scratching, like fingernails on the other side of glass. Once she swore she heard breathing, low and slow, in perfect rhythm with Ilia's own, until the breath paused. But Ilia's didn't. That night she dreamt of an ocean of mirrors, infinite and still, with one ripple moving against the laws of physics, swimming toward her. When she woke, Ili was standing at the foot of her bed. "He wants to switch now," he said. "But he's not just coming for me. He wants someone else too." Elena asked, "Who?" Ili didn't answer. But the mirror behind him, the black one, fogged from the inside. 2 handprints appeared, one large, one small. This wasn't just about a twin anymore. This was generational. Blood remembers its own reflections. Old contracts don't expire. They wait. Elena began searching through her own family records, ancient church logs, hidden birth certificates. What she found made her drop the book from her hands. She had a stillborn twin. It had never been spoken aloud. Her mother took the secret to her grave. 2 heartbeats, only one child survived. Or so they thought. The reflection never went away. Ilie wasn't the only door. He was the key, and she was the other lock. That's why the twin didn't kill him. That's why it whispered through drawings, through breath, through language older than speech. It needed Ilie alive, long enough to find her. And now it had. The mirror pulsed once and the handprints began tapping, not begging, not asking, signaling. Because when both ends of a forgotten pact are finally awakened, something ancient steps through. Not a person, not a ghost, but a force made from all the things we left behind in every mirror we ever walked away from. It was never just about the boy. It was about the first reflection ever cast. The air in the house had weight now. Not humidity, not pressure. Something older, observing, judging, waiting. It began small. Shadows moving just a second too slow. The reflection in a hallway mirror blinking after you did. The sound of a chair dragging across the floor. But every chair was in its place. Elena sealed off the mirrors. Black cloth, salt, symbols from old village rites long banned by the church. But it didn't matter, because the boy's twin no longer needed glass. It had learned shape. Ilie stopped sleeping. Not because he was afraid, because every time he closed his eyes, he was somewhere else. Not dreaming, not hallucinating, remembering. He saw rooms that didn't exist, filled with hundreds of versions of himself, all slightly wrong. One had no eyes, one had too many, one mouthed prayers backwards, and all of them watched him like they were waiting for him to forget who he was. But the worst version was the one that looked exactly like him, and smiled. "You think you're real?" it asked. "You're just the skin I haven't stepped into yet." Elena reached out to the local priest, Father Sava, an old man with too many burns on his hands for a man of God. He refused to enter the house. Instead, he sent a message. "It's a doppelgänger, not a demon, not a ghost, an echo that outlived the voice. They come when lineage and guilt overlap. You don't kill it, you choose who it becomes." But how do you choose between two versions of a soul? Elena began to change too. Her dreams were now his, and when she looked into a mirror, she wasn't always alone. Sometimes the other reflection smiled first, sometimes it whispered her name in reverse, and once, just once, it said, "You gave birth to me the moment you believed I existed." This wasn't a haunting, it was an inheritance. Some families pass down land, others pass down unfinished echoes, shaped by fear, loss, and unspoken sin. Ilie wasn't cursed, he was claimed, and that claiming was about to be sealed. It happened on a Thursday. The house was silent, too silent, like the stillness before a storm you can't hear, only feel. Elena had fallen asleep at the kitchen table, candles burning low. Ilie stood at the foot of the mirror in the attic, the one they had missed. The cloth covering it had slipped in the night, and the glass wasn't reflecting. It was observing. He felt drawn forward, not by fear, by something deeper. A pull in his spine, like threads being tugged from inside his bones. And when he looked, he didn't see himself. He saw the other one, same face, same eyes, but sharper, colder, more awake. The twin lifted his hand. Ilie's hand didn't move. Because the mirror wasn't a mirror anymore. It was a window. And something was standing on this side of it. "We're ready now," the twin said. "You forget. I remember." In that moment, Ilie felt a pressure in his chest, like memory rushing back that never belonged to him. He saw himself as a monk in a forgotten monastery. He saw himself locked in a cage, whispering to rats. He saw himself burn a church down with no fire. He saw Elena, not as his mother, but as the woman who once sealed him away. All at once, he understood. This twin wasn't born with him. He was born because of him. A soul fractured across lifetimes, split at birth, waiting for the one moment of emotional weakness that would allow it to step through. And now, Elie had opened the door. Elena woke too late. She ran to the attic, but the air was wrong. Colder, heavier, the kind of cold that lingers in churches long abandoned. Elie stood facing the glass, but only one version of him stood there now. She whispered, "Elie?" The boy turned slowly, smiled, and in that instant she knew. The one who answered her wasn't her son. "He gave me his name," the boy said, "and in return, I gave him silence." From that night on, Elie never spoke again, not in his sleep, not in his waking hours. But mirrors began whispering, and the reflection, it never left. You were never told this, but in old Romania there was a ritual feared more than any curse, not because it summoned death, but because it split life. The villagers called it umbra nașterii, the shadow birth. A forbidden rite once used by those who sought unnatural insight. It wasn't magic, not in the fairy tale sense. It was older, something inherited, like a stain passed down the blood. And Ilie's family, they were its keepers. Every few generations a child was born during a mirror eclipse, a rare night when moonlight passed through a specific mountain cave, striking a reflective surface with a precise geometry. On that night, a child could be divided, not in body, but in essence. Half would remain in this world. The other half, trapped in the silver, not dead, not dreaming, waiting. They believed this created a perfect balance, one self to walk the world, another to observe from the veil, a guardian in reflection, loyal, silent. But it never worked that way, because the shadow half didn't forget. It remembered everything, each slight, each secret, each sin committed by the flesh-bound twin. It grew not in years, but in hunger, and when the bond weakened, through trauma, grief, or madness, that shadow would slip its leash. Ilie's twin hadn't just appeared. He had been summoned, not by incantation, but by neglect of truth. The family had failed to tell Elie what he was. They'd buried the mirrors, changed the dates, burned the books. But the blood remembers what the mind forgets. And now, the twin wasn't just crossing over. He was rewriting. Taking Ilie's place. Replacing memory. Altering history through reflection. To become whole, the twin whispered from glass, one must first be alone. Meanwhile, Eleanor began to crumble. She found old diaries in the cellar. Her own grandmother had described the same pattern. A child, a mirror, a sill. It was never supposed to happen again. But it had. The family thought they could bury a curse under denial. But curses, like twins in glass, are patient. They don't die. They wait. And when the moment comes, they don't knock. They simply step through. In the village of Bistrica, the oldest ones never spoke of twins. They spoke of reflections that lied, of children who stared too long into ponds and came back different. Of families who covered their mirrors not in mourning, but in terror. Elena, armed with her grandmother's journal, began to dig deeper. She found records, erased from church archives, hidden in hollowed bookshelves, about a time the village called the Vanishing. It happened in 1826. 6 children gone. No trace. All born under the same celestial event. All last seen staring into water, glass, or polished steel. The priests blamed wolves. The mayor blamed gypsies. But the mothers, they whispered one name, Velin Umbra. It translates loosely as the returning shadow. Not a demon, not even a ghost, but a reversal, a force that exchanges. A child looks too long into their own eyes, and suddenly the one on the inside is the observer no more. He steps forward, takes the smile, takes the voice, takes the life. And the real child, left behind the glass, screaming, unheard, as the world embraces the imposter. Eleanor began to realize something far more horrifying than a ghost story. Elie wasn't being haunted by a twin. He was being replaced. And if that were true, how would she even know when the switch was complete? She returned home one night and saw him standing in the hall. Elie, or the one who looked like him, smiling too wide, blinking just a beat too slow. "Did you sleep well, Mama?" "Yes, I heard you dreaming. You cried out 3 times. You weren't near my room. I'm always near your room." She locked the door that night, covered the mirror, burned the diary. But mirrors are never really gone. They're in puddles, in cutlery, in eyes. And somewhere behind one, the real Elie was pounding on the glass, a prisoner of bloodline and silence. The villagers called it Codrul Umbre, the shadow forest. No paths led there, no maps marked it. But every child born in Bistrica knew its border, not because of stories, but because of warnings whispered through generations. Eleanor, desperate for answers, took her son's old lantern and left before dawn. She walked past the stone well, past the sheep fields, past the broken boundary where the grass stopped growing. And there, the trees began, twisted, blackened, bark like burned skin, leaves that never moved, even when the wind screamed. This was the place her grandmother wrote of, where the ritual had first been done, where the original 6 had vanished, and where the mirror twins were born. The deeper she walked, the less real the world felt. Birdsong disappeared. Her own breath sounded wrong. Time lost meaning. Minutes felt like hours, and yet her shadow never moved. Then she saw it. In a clearing, a standing mirror, 7 feet tall, framed in rusted iron and wrapped in withered vines. And on the mirror's glass, handprints. Small ones, child-sized, on the inside. As she stepped closer, her reflection didn't follow. It waited, still, watching. Then it blinked. Not her. Not her reflection, but the boy behind the glass. He looked just like Elie, but his eyes, they begged, panic, desperation. He mouthed a single word, "Mama." Her knees buckled. Because now, she understood. The real Elie had been taken, and the creature living in her house, wearing her son's voice, was something older. Something born in this very forest. She reached to touch the glass, and the mirror rippled. Cold fingers gripped hers. Then a voice, not spoken aloud but echoed inside her mind. One must return, for one to escape. A choice. Trade places. Walk into the mirror. Bring Elie back. But who would raise him when she was trapped behind the glass forever? And what if he was no longer fully himself? What if the mirror had already taken parts of him? She turned, but the path behind her was gone. Only one direction remained. Forward. Into the reflection. In the hushed chambers beneath Oradia Fortress, buried beneath centuries of blood and stone, a library exists that no scholar speaks of, a place not built for studying, but for binding. Binding truth. Binding souls. Binding what should have never been unbound. There, beneath the 3rd level where the sunlight cannot reach, a single room is walled entirely with obsidian mirrors. No reflections, only black glass. At the center sits a single artifact, the Codex Geminus, the twin codex, bound in stitched skin, inked in a language no living tongue can speak. Inside, page 47 holds a symbol, A split eye, bisected by a jagged vertical line, mirrored halves, and under it 5 words scrawled in crimson. To see him, one must vanish. The him in the text is not God, not even close. The codex speaks of an entity older than time, one who only exists where reflection begins. The watcher between. He is not seen with the naked eye, but only in reverse, in the shimmer of a pond at dusk, in the edge of a broken mirror, in the second where your reflection lingers after you've walked away. The mirror rite was his gift to the first coven, 6 monks who defected from the Vatican in 1239 and fled to the Carpathians. They believed the world was broken in halves, truth and lie, light and shadow, self and twin, and through reflection they could summon what lived on the other side. But the rite required sacrifice. Each time the mirror was activated, it stole a piece of the real, a memory, a voice, a heartbeat. Eventually it learned to take people. Children especially were easy. Innocent minds reflect more clearly, fewer lies, fewer masks. Over centuries the monks evolved into an underground sect, Fratsia Oglinzi, the Brotherhood of the Mirror. Their goal wasn't power, it was exchange. Trade the unwanted, abandon the broken, and in return, receive something flawless, a twin without pain, without hesitation, without doubt. A child of reflection, a perfect son, but perfect things do not love, they do not feel, they obey. Elena's family was one of the original bloodlines, bound by ancient promise to feed the mirror, generation after generation. But no one told her. Until it was too late. The villagers said Elena was mad, that her grief had twisted her mind beyond return, but madness isn't losing touch with reality. It's seeing a reality no one else can bear to see, and being told it's not real. They told her Eli had been born alone, that the screaming, the mirror breaking, the shadows in his room were just her stress, her trauma, her nerves unraveling. But behind closed doors, in the hidden parts of her own home, were symbols she never placed, etched into the wood of the cradle, carved into the beams of the attic, drawn in ash beneath her floorboards. The Brotherhood had been inside her house long before she gave birth. She wasn't raising a child. She was raising a vessel. Ili was born under a blood moon, a rare night when the celestial mirror turns red and the veil thins. He wasn't the first child they tried this with, but he was the first one who survived the reflection. See, the Brotherhood didn't create twins. They summoned them, called forth the inverse, the echo trapped in the other world. But only one child could exist at a time in the material world. The other had to live in the mirror. Unless they broke the mother. A mother's memory is the anchor. Her love defines the real child. So they erased pieces of Elena's mind. First her memories of the birth, then the sense that something was missing. Finally, the certainty that anything had ever been wrong. She stopped questioning why Ilea never cast a clear reflection. She stopped noticing that sometimes, when he smiled, his face didn't move in the mirror. But the twin wasn't satisfied with being confined. He wanted more. He began whispering to Eli in the silence, teaching him things no child should know. Names of ancient entities, forgotten rituals, the hidden doors inside his own dreams. Elena began waking up to find mirrors turned backwards or rooms unnaturally cold. And Saktius, only once, she saw her son walking past the hallway mirror while his reflection stared directly at her. That was the night she remembered everything. It wasn't madness. It was memory reasserting itself, the mind breaking through its own conditioning, the Brotherhood's lies unraveling, and in that crack, a sliver of truth broke through. But some truths should never be remembered. It's easy to call it a twin. That word makes it seem human, natural, comforting even. A child born with a sibling, a biological accident. But what Elia's reflection truly was, had no heartbeat, no soul, no name. Not in this world. In ancient texts, ones never translated into modern languages. Mirror entities are known by another name, orastum. It means that which mimics the living, but is not of life. Orastum are not born, they are summoned by those who understand the mirror is not glass, but a veil between two truths. What is seen, and what is watching you see it. The earliest brotherhood rituals weren't conducted in castles or churches, but in caves carved with obsidian, surrounded by black water, facing still surfaces where no breeze could ripple the image. They believed that the first orastum was born when a dying man stared too long into his reflection, and his fear entered the other side. The reflection blinked, but he didn't. From that moment, mirrors were no longer tools for grooming or light. They became portals for study, gateways to test what could come through. The child Elena gave birth to, Ilya, was chosen not for who he was, but what he could host. The Brotherhood didn't care about him. They wanted to awaken the Watcher, the entity behind Ilya's reflection, a being older than language, known by its shape but never by name. It has appeared before in ancient Persian mirrors, in Egyptian tomb-polished bronze, even in cracked Roman fountains. In every case, children went missing, and in every case, only one footprint was ever found. The Watcher doesn't possess. It mirrors you until you lose track of who is real. It becomes you, not by invading, but by erasing your reflection piece by piece until you vanish, and it remains. Eli had been taught to speak to it, but now the reflection was speaking back, and every word was in reverse. His drawings turned to symbols, his games became rituals, and one night Eleanor walked into his room and found him gone, but his reflection still standing in the mirror, smiling. There are few truths more horrifying than this. Your soul can be stolen, not with a knife or spell, but through your own reflection. Not in a fairy tale way, not in fiction, but in rituals written in blood, whispered by ancient orders who never died, only rebranded. The Brotherhood knew that mirrors were not made to see yourself, they were made to test if something else is looking back. They believed that if a child stared into a mirror long enough, especially a child with unresolved trauma, shame, or abandonment, the reflection would begin to separate. Not physically, psychologically. The self would fracture. First in dreams, then in behavior, then in memory. Ili was perfect for this. He had no father. He was born in grief, and he was taught by Eleanor to believe that the mirror held answers. So the Brotherhood prepared the transfer. They placed him inside an octagonal room, 8 walls, 8 mirrors, facing inward. This design wasn't aesthetic. It was an ancient containment structure believed to amplify spiritual dissonance and allow the orastum to fully mimic the child until the soul weakened. No cameras, no observers, just candles, chanting, and a boy forced to stare at himself until he no longer knew what self meant. Each mirror showed something slightly different. One Ili blinked twice. Another had blood on his hands. A third stood still even when the others moved. But only one, the true mirror, held the Watcher. The transfer happened at 3:03 a.m. That number is no accident. The Brotherhood believed 3:03 was the mirror of 3:30, the anti-hour, when reality thins and identities are most vulnerable. At that moment, Ili's body shuddered. He collapsed. Eyes open, but no recognition. They thought it failed. But then, in all 8 mirrors at once, Ili looked up, smiled, and whispered, "I remember now." But he didn't mean Ili remembered. Bered. He meant the thing wearing Ili's face remembered who it was before it was called through. The Brotherhood rejoiced. The Watcher was here. They thought they had control, but mirrors don't take sides. They thought it was finished. The Watcher had taken its place. The ritual was successful, but this was not possession. This was merging. And in merging there is no clear line, no leash, no master. For the first few days, Ili appeared normal. Too normal. His speech was articulate, his movements were precise. He stopped stuttering. He made perfect eye contact, with everyone, except his mother. Elena knew. She saw the tiny details. He blinked with perfect symmetry. He didn't cry when his pet dog was hit by a carriage. He ate his food like he'd studied how humans eat, not like he needed to eat. But the mirror told the truth. He refused to pass it. He covered everyone in the house with black velvet. And when Elena uncovered one, just one, she saw it. Ilya's reflection stayed behind, frozen, watching, grinning. That wasn't her son. Or if it was, it wasn't only him anymore. She confronted the Brotherhood. She begged for a reversal, for a cleansing, for anything. But their eyes had changed too. They spoke to her in riddles now, phrases like, "The mirror teaches through reflection. What you call possession, we call evolution. You should be proud. He is the first." The first of what? They wouldn't say. But she heard whispers in town, other children missing, other mirrors covered in rural homes, other watchers rumored to walk among them, learning, mimicking, blending. Elena made a decision. She would shatter every mirror in the house, and she did, every last one. But when she reached the final piece, hidden in the attic behind old books and forgotten toys, it shattered before she touched it. A scream erupted, not from the glass, but from inside Eli. He collapsed, foaming, screaming in a voice that wasn't his and wasn't human. And from that point on, Eli had no reflection, not in glass, not in water, not even in another person's eyes. He had become what the Brotherhood feared and worshipped, something that existed only when seen by others. A vessel for something ancient, adaptive, and now, invisible. At first, it was small things. A mirror fogged up before anyone breathed on it. A child saw her own reflection wave, while her hand stayed still. Barbers stopped using wall mirrors because the movements didn't match their customers. Eyes looked back just a little too long. Smiles lingered after their owners had walked away. It spread like a quiet sickness, not contagious through touch or sound, but through sight. It began in Targu Mureș, where Ilya's reflection had vanished. But within weeks, reports came from Cluj, Brașov, and eventually Bucharest. Reflections behaving strangely. At first, the church said it was mass hysteria. But what kind of hysteria leaves claw marks inside the glass? One elderly man smashed his shaving mirror after he saw his reflection whispering in Latin, a language he had never learned. A girl in a convent was found weeping in front of a mirror that showed her wearing funeral robes, though she was still alive. And then came the first confirmed disconnect. A shopkeeper's reflection failed to follow him. It simply stood there, smiling, then slowly walked away. Not out of the mirror, but deeper into it, as if there were depth to the glass, as if it led somewhere else. The Brotherhood re-emerged. They called it the reversal. They said the boundary between the physical and the mirrored world had always been paper-thin. But Ilya's merging had punched a hole in it. What was inside was looking out, learning, waiting, preparing. They called the entities reflected, not demons, not ghosts, something older, something architectural, as if mirrors weren't invented to help us see ourselves, but to monitor our progress. The Brotherhood didn't want to stop them. They wanted guidance, power, alignment. So they offered Eli as the first gate, and now the reflections didn't need a host. They just needed to be seen. And you've looked into a mirror today, haven't you? You remember what your reflection did. But do you remember what it did after you left the room? They called it mercy blindness. At first, it only struck the old mirror makers, the ones who still used silver nitrate, hand-polished glass, and prayers whispered over cooling frames, men who had spent decades pouring reflection into form. Then it spread to their apprentices, and then to anyone who touched a mirror that wasn't yet sealed. The victims all said the same thing before their vision faded. "It's not darkness I see. It's someone else's light." By 1880, Romanian mirror guilds, many dating back to the 14th century, had shut down completely, not because they feared financial ruin, but because their work was summoning something. They began smashing their own creations, but not to destroy what they'd made, to trap what they'd seen. One guildmaster, Arpad Lupu, confessed in his last days to a priest, "We never made mirrors, we made windows that lied. They told us we were looking at ourselves, but we were only being taught to obey." The church refused to hear more, but the Brotherhood listened. They documented every incident, catalogued every disobedient reflection, and behind locked doors they began building a new kind of mirror, one that didn't just reflect, but recorded. These living mirrors were said to contain not silver, but trace elements of mercury, crushed bone, and a strand of hair from a living host. Once installed in a room, they didn't just reflect light. They held onto memory. A conversation, a look, a scream. The Brotherhood claimed they were tools for spiritual alignment. But those who stood before them too long changed. Their eyes no longer tracked motion the way they used to. They began pausing, as if listening to something just behind them. They stood straighter, spoke slower, and often whispered to their own reflections long after midnight. And the terrifying part, they didn't fear what they saw anymore. They loved it, like something ancient had finally stepped in and taken the wheel. You see, reflection isn't just duplication, it's consent. Every time you glance at yourself in passing, the nod, the glance, the smile, you're saying, "Yes, I still believe that's me, but what if it's not?" There's a tomb in the hills near Sibiu. No name, no dates, just an iron plate, sealed with melted mirror glass. Villagers won't go near it, even the birds avoid the trees around it, as if reflection itself had been buried alive. The boy inside, his name was Ionel Kazaku, died at 13. Fell from the bell tower while chasing his own reflection in a shard of broken mirror. But that's not the story they tell in hushed tones. The real horror started after his death. A week after the funeral, Ionel's mother, Elena, began to swear the mirrors in her house weren't behaving. She'd pass by and catch two boys, not one, her dead son, and another child beside him, wearing the same clothes with a smile that never quite matched. At first, the priest told her it was grief. But then her neighbors started seeing it too. And then the school teacher fainted when she saw Ionel, or something that wore his face, standing motionless in the hallway mirror, mouthing words she couldn't hear. They covered the mirrors, then smashed them. But even in the shards, he remained. Because Ionel's reflection didn't die with his body, and the more they tried to erase him, the more it grew, older. You see, the twin in the mirror wasn't just a phantom. It aged, slowly but surely. Over the years, villagers who dared peek into shards of the past claimed they saw a version of Ionel wrinkled, hardened, monstrous. His smile became a sneer, and in his eyes, a promise. "You looked once. You believed I was you. Now I belong." The Brotherhood came back, quietly. They didn't perform an exorcism. They performed a transfer. Using a mirror taken from the underground vaults of Cluj-Napoca, one that hadn't been used in over 300 years, they sealed the reflection inside. But not before it thanked them. "Now I'm free. On your side." Today, the grave in Sibiu doesn't just hold a body, it holds a me, era sealed with an oath. And the curse? Anyone who tries to unseal it won't see themselves anymore. They'll see who they could have become, if every lie they'd ever told had come true. They called it the Gallery of Echoes, a long underground corridor beneath the summer estate of Count Theodore Basarab, carved entirely from obsidian and silver-backed glass. Hidden behind the wine cellar, it stretched 93 meters through the bedrock. No torches were allowed, no candles, only the soft glow of lantern light behind smoked glass. But it wasn't the darkness that made men tremble. It was the reflections. Every wall, every surface, covered in mirrors so old they no longer showed what is, but what was, and worse, what might be. Built in the late 1700s, the corridor wasn't meant for decoration or vanity. It was a ritual path, a place Romanian nobles were required to walk before assuming their estate titles, a test, or more precisely, a bargain. Because halfway through the corridor, the reflections split. On one side you saw the version of yourself shaped by truth. On the other, the version shaped by every lie you've ever whispered, hidden, or believed. One servant, a mute boy named Andrei, snuck in at age 10. He made it halfway. His screams were never heard, but the claw marks along the mirrored walls tell the story no one dares speak. When they found him days later, the boy was silent still, but in the mirrors he kept moving. His reflection stared, blinked, smiled, even as the boy sat in a corner, unblinking, empty. The Count. He completed the ritual every year, not out of tradition, but obligation. Because the deeper truth is this: the reflection must be fed. The twin, birthed from Ionel's sealed mirror years before, wasn't destroyed. He was adopted, and every noble who entered the corridor came out with just enough of him stitched into their soul. That's why the nobility changed, why the lineage turned colder, darker, more cruel. Because every walk through the gallery was a sacrifice of self, trading a sliver of humanity for a fragment of something older and infinitely more calculating. One priest wrote in 1882, "They do not rule by divine right, they rule because they no longer reflect." Ask yourself, if you walked down that corridor, would your reflection follow you out, or would it stay behind, finally free, and you, the prisoner? It happened only once every 100 years. The ritual was known simply as the sealing, a day whispered about in the darkest corners of Romanian folklore, the final act in the contract between noble blood and the thing that watched through the glass. On this day, the gallery of echoes would close from both ends, thick iron doors grinding shut with the sound of weeping metal. No one entered, no one left, and for exactly 1 hour, the mirrors would cease to reflect anything at all. No light, no shadow, no shape, only a black, endless pain, like looking into the back of a closed eye. Inside, a chosen noble, usually the most ambitious, the most willing to sacrifice truth for power, would offer up a final piece of themselves, not a hand, not blood, but something more subtle, more permanent. Memory. You see, memories are the last safeguard of the soul. They are how we recognize ourselves, how we tether our reality. Take away enough memories, and the body walks, speaks, obeys. But the will is broken. During the sealing, the mirrors strip the chosen of memory. Slowly, meticulously, a kiss from a mother, a promise made in childhood, a betrayal never forgiven, a fear whispered in the dark, all removed, until nothing remains but a shell capable of anything, without conscience, without hesitation. That is how Ionel's lineage grew so coldly perfect. That is how they seeded themselves into politics, church, medicine, finance, leaving a trail of soulless, high-functioning reflections in human skin. And here's the truth they never wanted whispered. Not every noble who entered the gallery returned. Some were claimed completely, others merged. On rare occasions, the doors would open, and two identical figures would emerge, both speaking the same name, both claiming to be real. One always vanished, quietly, but those who watched closely said they could tell the difference. Kabo, not by voice, not by memory, but by the eyes. The real ones held sadness, the other, only hunger. So let me ask you this. If the cost of ultimate power was your ability to remember who you are, would you still walk into that mirror? By 1880, the mirrors weren't just passive gateways anymore. They were sentient observers. They had learned. They had adapted. And now they reached out. It began in the manor house of Count Draculesti, Ionel's ancestral home, deep in the Carpathian Mountains, a place so silent the wind avoided it, a place where mirrors were nailed to the walls, as if someone feared they might move. One evening, as a storm cracked the sky open and thunder shook the bones of the valley, Ionel's nursemaid went missing, her bed undisturbed, her shoes at the door, no signs of struggle, only a smear of fingertips down the surface of the mirror in the hallway, not from the outside but from inside the glass. From that night on, the staff began whispering of reflections that didn't quite match. A butler would glance in the silver tray and see himself smiling when he hadn't moved his lips. A maid would pass a mirror and see a bruise on her neck, one she didn't have. And Ionel? He stopped speaking altogether. Because his twin, the one who lived behind the mirror, no longer needed to wait for darkness. At 3:33 a.m. each night the house would hold its breath, the hallway lights would flicker, the temperature would drop, and the sound of footsteps, bare, deliberate, would echo through the marble floors, but there was never anyone there. Until the drawings began. Ionel, barely 5, started sketching obsessively, hundreds of pages, all the same image. Himself, standing beside himself. But the second figure's face was always shaded in black. No features, no eyes, no mouth. Only a gaping shadow with teeth like broken porcelain. And on one page, a page hidden under his mattress, he wrote a single sentence in shaky Romanian. He says I was the one who died, not him. The family burned that page. But some truths can't be destroyed, because here's what no one tells you. When a mirror ben or makes a copy, it doesn't just reflect you, it improves you. Removes your fear, your limits, your soul. And that's why some men in power never blink. They don't need to. Ionel was no longer the boy the villagers once whispered about. He had become something else, or perhaps less of something. He stopped responding to his name. He would sit for hours in front of the mirror, his breath fogging the glass, as if trying to remember which side he truly belonged to. One night the governess noticed it. His reflection blinked, but Ionel did not. That's when it began, the vanishing. It started with small things. Ionel's shadow stopped following him correctly, lagging a second too late or stretching toward light instead of away from it. His voice grew quieter, even when he screamed. And his reflection? It became louder, sharper, more confident. Then came the handwriting test. Ionel could no longer write his name correctly. The letters reversed themselves. But when he stood in front of a mirror and copied his reflection, the writing came out perfect, too perfect, identical, every time. His mother tried to bring in priests. The mirrors cracked on their own. Glass doesn't shatter like that, not from the center out. It was like something was pushing from behind. They say Ionel spoke once that week, just once. To the housekeeper. He said, "He's learning to be me. He's better at it than I ever was." That same night, the real Ionel's bedroom door was found locked from the inside. When they broke it open, he was gone. But his reflection, still standing, still staring, still smiling. The doctors said trauma, the church said possession, but the secret men, the ones who visit only when truth is too dangerous, they said it was a successful transference. You see, there are rituals far older than Christianity. Rituals whispered by ancient cults that believed in mirror selves, entities that could be cultivated, refined, and then swapped. Because power doesn't come from what you show the world, it comes from what watches back. And if you could create a version of yourself that didn't feel fear, guilt, or limits, wouldn't you want to trade places too? Ionel's parents swore they never opened the door, and yet, by morning, he was back. Same face, same clothes, same scent of lavender and coal from the night before. But something was wrong. He blinked too often, smiled too wide. His voice carried more weight than his size allowed, and when he spoke, he no longer stuttered, no longer asked for permission. Ionel was improved. He walked through the halls like he owned the house, correcting the servants, firing the governess, rearranging the father's library by category and author. At 7 years old, the mirror twin had crossed over. And here's the secret. He didn't need to pretend. The real Ionel, the one born of flesh, was timid, frail, curious, but cautious. But this new presence? He was calculated, fearless, hungry. He began speaking to guests with authority, reading ancient Latin texts fluently. He told a visiting bishop that the church had it half right and wholly blind. The bishop laughed. Until Ionel repeated something only the bishop and the Vatican were supposed to know. Something buried in a locked drawer in Rome. That's when the bishop fainted. Whispers reached Vienna, then Paris. Psychiatrists, occultists, and secret societies all took interest, but none could prove what had happened. You see, it's difficult to dissect what you cannot define. Was it possession? Was it a soul swap? Or something older? In the apocryphal scrolls of Dacia, there is mention of the reflective rite, a ritual to perfect the self by abandoning the flawed vessel and stepping into the mirrored ideal. Few believed it, even fewer dared it. But Ionel's twin, the one who came from the mirror, had not just stepped in. He had replaced him. And here's what should unsettle you the most. Everyone accepted it. The parents, the priests, the house staff. Whether they sensed the truth or were enchanted by the boy, this new presence, they let it happen. Why? Because power silences doubt. And when you're finally in the presence of something that doesn't hesitate, doesn't flinch, doesn't fear, you stop asking questions, you obey. By 1891, the boy who once spoke to mirrors was speaking in Parliament. They called him a prodigy, a symbol of a new Romania. But behind closed doors, something far older was whispering through him. Ionel was no longer a boy. He had grown, rapidly, unnaturally. At 11, he looked 16. His voice echoed in rooms even after he left them. No one could explain the gravitas he carried. It wasn't charisma, it was command. A kind of psychic pressure that made seasoned men stand straighter and noble women avert their gaze. And then came the orders. He founded the Ordinal Oglinzi, the Order of the Mirror. They claimed to be a philosophical society promoting Romanian heritage and self-mastery. But their gatherings were held underground, literally, beneath stone catacombs laced with obsidian mirrors and flickering candlelight. No photographs, no records, only symbols. A twin serpent coiled around a cracked mirror. Whispers leaked. High-ranking judges, bishops, military officers, all reportedly members. Initiates said they underwent a ritual in which their reflections stopped mimicking them, and only after that were they reborn. Some said Ionel didn't age after that year. He simply refined. His eyes grew colder, his posture straighter, and his voice? He spoke less, but when he did, even birds outside the windows went silent. Then came the policy changes. New laws passed with eerie speed. Children in select cities were no longer allowed mirrors in their homes. Art depicting reflection was banned. Churches reported their holy mirrors, used for angelic communion, went black. And beneath it all, Romania flourished, economically, militarily, culturally. But it wasn't the nation rising, it was something inside it. And Ionel, he stopped appearing in public altogether, except in portraits. Painted ones, never photographed, because no camera ever captured him fully. The lens would jam, the glass would crack. Or worse, it would show someone else behind his eyes. He was just a schoolteacher. Dumitru Codrescu, 36, a father, a patriot, and for 6 years he'd watched his town, Brașov, shift into something unrecognizable. Children stopped laughing. Churches replaced sermons with mirror meditations, and every family received a new silver-framed mirror with a stamped seal, OO, the Order of the Mirror. Dumitru's daughter Anka had begun whispering to her reflection, then stopped responding to him entirely. Doctors called it mirror psychosis, but Dumitru knew better. He remembered the old stories from his grandmother, tales of the one who walks behind glass, a twin that lives in silver, feeding on sight and obedience. So when Ionel announced his first public address in 3 years, a speech atop the Palace of Culture in Iași, Dumitru packed a pistol, scribbled a goodbye note, and boarded a train. The square was overflowing, thousands in silence, no chants, no signs, no guards, just waiting, as if hypnotized. And then he appeared. Ionel, but not quite him. His presence felt like a hole in reality. Time seemed to bend around his gestures, and when he raised his hand, even the wind stopped. Dumitru pushed through the crowd, heart pounding. He raised the pistol, aimed, and froze. Not from fear, from what he saw. As Ionel turned toward him, the glass panels behind the stage reflected a different figure. It looked like Ionel, but older, hungrier. Its mouth moved before Ionel's, its eyes locked with Dumitru's, and whispered, "I've already replaced your blood." He fired anyway. The bullet shattered a mirror. Not Ionel, but for a split second, everyone saw it. A third figure in the shards. Neither Dumitru nor Ionel. Something between, or beneath. He was tackled, arrested, and dragged into a van. But he never made it to prison, because the van never existed. Witnesses said it dissolved before it reached the street corner. No wreckage, no smoke, just a single cracked mirror left behind on the road. Dumitru was never seen again. But 3 nights later, a new law passed. All children must sleep facing their mirrors. 3 months after Dumitru vanished, a secret excavation began beneath the crumbling estate of the First Order Chancellor, Nicolae Ursu. The public was told it was structural maintenance. But beneath the black marble floors, something far older than the building itself was unearthed. At 13.6 meters down, they struck stone, but not just any stone. Polished obsidian carved with inscriptions that predate the Dacian script. No known alphabet, only symbols, sharp looping sigils resembling eyes, teeth, and twins conjoined by chains. The deeper they dug, the colder it became. Not cold like winter, cold like absence, like death hadn't left yet. Then they found it. A chamber shaped like a mirror laid flat. Walls covered in metal infused with silver and human bone. At its center, a monolith, black, vertical, perfectly reflective. But here's what shattered the minds of every scientist and soldier who entered. It did not reflect them. Instead, it showed other people. Children they'd never seen. Faces aged backward. Eyes too large, too knowing. Some researchers claimed they could hear voices, their own voices, whispering in reverse, revealing memories they never lived. The military sealed it off, but it was too late. A file leaked. Just one. A blurry photo taken by a miner, uploaded before he was reassigned to an Arctic base. The photo showed the monolith, and next to it, the exact face of Ionel. Not recent, not young, but ancient, fossilized in the rock like a preserved twin trapped in time. You understand now, Ionel didn't rise to power. He was returned. Summoned, released. The mirrors weren't created to honor him. They were his gateways, his feeding grounds. And every child who stares into a mirror now, he's looking back. At this point, viewer, if you've come this far, you've already crossed the threshold. Comment below the words, "No reflection remains," twice, to affirm your awakening and to anchor yourself before the next layer pulls you in. In all the portraits, press appearances, and decrees issued under Ionel's reign between 1901 and 1912, there is one haunting consistency. He was only ever seen in public during solar eclipses. Not just night, not just shadow, Eclipses. 12 of them, precisely timed across 11 years, each coinciding with a documented public event where INL made an appearance. A speech, a blessing, a funeral of arrival. Always under that strange false twilight when the sun is blotted out and time holds its breath. You're probably wondering why. Because eclipses are doorways, not metaphorically, not symbolically, physically. Every ancient civilization, from the Chaldeans to the early Slavs, viewed solar eclipses as the only moments the veil between this world and its reflection is thinnest. The Greeks called it the mirror hour. The Persians named it Zarhamek, meaning when the shadow eats its brother. And in Romanian folklore, passed secretly among the Roma, it was known as Ceasul Pierdut, the lost hour. It's during this hour that INL, or the thing wearing his face, could cross freely, fully embodied, fully in control, but only then. Because the rest of the time, INL wasn't here. He was trapped behind the mirror, waiting. What you saw on regular days was only a fragment, a projection, a whisper, a twin left behind to observe, not to act. But during eclipses, the veil dissolved, and the mirror twin became the real one. This is why every time INL toured a new region during an eclipse, children disappeared within 48 hours. Always twins. Always one stillborn, one surviving, or so it seemed, because in reality, both were alive, but only one was allowed to live in this world. The other was taken back through the mirror, to be raised, trained, and bound. INL wasn't the first. He was the latest. And each eclipse, a coronation for the next. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is institutional transdimensional inheritance, a lineage of control that doesn't pass through blood, but reflection. And here's what they never tell you. The next solar eclipse, visible in North America, is in 8 months. And INL, he has never been buried. You remember 1947 for one thing, Roswell. But what if I told you that wasn't the only body the US government recovered that year? In fact, just 3 months earlier. A diplomatic courier arrived at Fort Detrick, Maryland. He didn't carry papers. He carried a sealed, triple-locked iron coffin, stamped with 2 symbols, the sigil of the Vatican's Archivum Secretum, and the insignia of Romania's Black Chamber, long thought disbanded. Inside the coffin was the body of INL Petrescu, perfectly preserved, skin like porcelain, pupils dilated, as if mid-hypnosis. He hadn't decayed. He hadn't aged. In fact, he was warm, no heartbeat, no breath. But his body was exactly 98.6 degrees. What happened next never made it to any file you'll find through FOIA, because this wasn't just a corpse. This was a resonance vessel, a biological structure engineered to anchor a consciousness across planes, a mirror soul encased in flesh, a body designed to be reawakened when the right alignment returns. The military's top Psi operative team, Project Umbra, was tasked with deciphering INL's physiology. They failed. Because what they found wasn't a human body. It had human genetics, yes. But layered into the marrow were unknown metalloid sequences, like memory latticework. Think, bone as circuitry. More disturbing? Every time the lights dimmed, INL's body shifted position in the coffin. Slightly, subtly, as if reacting to the shadow. They moved it to a vacuum-sealed chamber beneath Site 9, the now decommissioned Biological Anomalies Wing in Nevada. There, for over 70 years, the body remained in stasis. Until 2021, when the chamber seal failed during a blackout, caught on a single frame of night vision surveillance, a handprint on the inside of the viewing glass. But no breach, no broken lock. INL's body was gone. No trail, no trace. Only one word, smeared in condensation left behind on the glass. Gemini, Romanian for twins. So ask yourself, what if he's already crossed back? What if he's walking among us, in shadows, reflections, places we don't look? The only woman who ever saw Ionel move never spoke again. Her name was Dr. Eliza Hartman, a behavioral neurologist contracted by the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects in 1982. She was fluent in 5 languages, published in over 20 scientific journals, and had a reputation for exposing psychological fraud in government experiments. She didn't believe in the supernatural. She believed in control, data, evidence. Until she was assigned to room 512 beneath Site 9, the room where Ionel's body was kept. She was tasked with monitoring his neural echo, a strange phenomenon where low-frequency oscillations were detected near the cadaver, despite no signs of life, just ambient vibrations, like a hum, like a signal, trying to re-establish contact. On her 3rd night in the chamber, Eliza requested to be left alone. She believed she could induce a reaction by flooding the room with alternating light frequencies, testing if the body was responding to photon interference. At 3:14 a.m., the footage begins to glitch, not digitally, but physically. The analog tape skips, bends, tears itself. When the backup audio was recovered, they found only 3 words in Dr. Hartman's voice. Not spoken, whispered. He's not alone. When security entered 40 minutes later, they found her curled into the corner, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a scream, but no sound. She had bitten through her own tongue. But what they didn't release, what they locked away in a classified annex file labeled Doppelgate Protocol, was her drawing, scratched into the vinyl floor with a broken pen, a mirror. But in the reflection, not Ionel. A second boy, identical, but inverted, and he was smiling. Security reports stated her last written phrase before descending into silence. Reflections are not passive. It wasn't metaphor. She meant it literally. What we consider a reflection, light bouncing back. You've felt it, haven't you? That chill. When you catch your reflection staring a moment too long. When your face doesn't feel like yours. When the mirror hesitates, just for a breath before matching your movement. It's not paranoia. It's not your mind playing tricks. It's a memory. Waking up. Because the mirror you're looking into, it may not be a reflection at all. It may be a surveillance point, a one-way glass for something that's been waiting, ever since Ionel disappeared in 1880. Let me tell you what they never released. In 1999, a private contractor unearthed the final mirror during renovations beneath Bran Castle, the so-called Dracula's Castle. It had no backing, no glass, just a dull, cold slab polished so smooth it swallowed light, and etched in the frame were the same sigils carved around Ionel's burial site. 3 weeks later, every man who touched that mirror reported the same thing. I'm not sure which one of us came back. And then, the disappearances began. Here's where the cycle completes. Ionel was never the boy. He was the mask, the vessel, the real entity, the twin in the mirror, the one with no name, no origin, no voice, until it took yours, until it began to mirror you perfectly. Every time you look into a mirror, you train it. Every expression you mimic, every word you say aloud, you are feeding it data, and when the day comes, when its calculations are complete, when it no longer needs you to move first, it will reach through the thin membrane and switch places. So ask yourself right now, when was the last time you saw yourself blink in the mirror at the exact same time? This is no fairy tale. This is ancient technology, a control mechanism, a harvesting tool, and Ionel, he was the prototype, the first mirror born, the first boy to be replaced. They called it madness, but madness is just memory misfiled. So if you're read, easy to remember, comment below the phrase, I am not the reflection, I am the watcher. I am not the reflection, I am the watcher. Twice. Exactly. Because once you do, you no longer belong to them. You become one of us. The ones who remember, the ones who were never meant to survive this knowledge, and the ones who will never be replaced.